Hi everyone. So today I'll be talking about neuroeconomics, and this is a field that is sort of like a hybrid between economics and biology. It seeks to explain our behaviors financially and economically through by looking at images of brains and also measuring different brain activity in order to assess what is going on in the brain when we are making certain decisions. So decision making is associated with the different options made available to the decision maker and the conscious choice to choose one option over the other. Human brains translate each option into a common factor in order to assess the relative overall value to the decision maker. So, for example, in terms of business, we would assess these different options based on their expected payout amount. So we would assess a certain dollar amount to one option, and we would assess a certain dollar amount to the other option. And in doing so, to all the available options, we can therefore choose the most effective and the most successful option available to us. So when making decisions with risk and uncertainty involved, the Brodmann Area 8, as shown in the figure, also known as BA8, is a region of the brain that experiences increased activity. So this region of the frontal cortex is known to be responsible for the feeling of hope that is associated with uncertainty. The prefrontal cortex also exhibits increased activity in mental functions like reasoning and understanding. The insular cortex is activated when there is a known risk, like when gambling. So, someone who is uncertain about a situation might be more inclined to act blindly with hopes of a favorable outcome. Whereas someone with a known risk would be more inclined to not make that choice at all because they have knowledge of that risk, even though it isn't a certain outcome. So next we go into more of the biological aspect of what is going on in our brains. So to start, we begin by discussing what a neuron is, and a neuron is the basic functional unit. It's the singular cell of the nervous system that allows for rapid communication by electrical signals within the human body. It serves as a primary control system as a whole when all these neurons come together to form tissue and therefore the organs in our nervous system. A neurotransmitter is a signaling molecule that works in close proximity between two neurons that can lead to an activation or inhibition effect of the target neuron, effectively communicating the delayed message between cells. So the neurotransmitter will serve as information being conveyed between two different nerve cells, and this communication is passed on through many different cells, and eventually different regions of the brain will receive this information in order to make informed decisions. So, an example of a neurotransmitter is dopamine, and dopamine is highly associated with the reward system. So, it's been shown to convey information also about uncertainty and mediate the perception of risk in our minds. So, now I'd like to talk more about how we perceive and how we respond, well, how our brains respond to certain rewards. So, according to the expected utility hypothesis, which describes individuals' assessment of different options and their likelihood of being chosen according to their expected level of utility, the expected utility for each set of options is linear in probability. However, um, there was a paper that was published. It was a study done by two scientists studying the neural response to rewards under risk. So the research used functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is also known as fMRI, to measure brain activity. And results had shown that the striatum activity is correlated with how much probability is actually being distorted. The results showed that valuations of risky behavior like gambling are distorted due to the striatum's increased activity of perceiving the possible rewards that are associated with the risky behavior. So, this distorted probability of the expected outcome drives us to make irrational decisions like buying lottery tickets when the probability is less than 1%. So, this perceived reward that we imagine ourselves in, um, this sort of drives us to make irrational decisions, even though we know that buying this lottery ticket will result in a loss of our money rather than the potential gain. So Now I'd like to talk more about the reward pathway and how reward is perceived in our brains. Dopamine is produced in the ventricle tegmental area of the midbrain. The dopamine that is released will travel to many different regions of the brain, including the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus, where the dopamine receptors on the neurons of these regions will initiate cellular responses to produce the feeling of happiness, the feeling of accomplishment, and the feeling of reward. So the nucleus accumbens, located in the ventral striatum, the amygdala, and the hippocampus are all part of the mesolimbic pathway, which is responsible for producing the feeling of accomplishment and the feeling of success in our brains. So the amygdala is responsible for producing emotions such as happiness. So, for example, if we made an investment and the payout was a net profit, we would feel happiness because of the amygdala. It's responsible for producing emotions. The hippocampus is responsible for remembering the circumstances of the situation that produced such results. So, for example, you may remember the exact scenario and the exact circumstances of the situation in which you put your money into for investment, and these memories that arise from the good payout, these memories are made and stored by the hippocampus. So the nucleus accumbens, which is responsible for motor functions, will drive your physical nature to replicate the same situation to get the same result. So, for example, the easiest way to explain this concept is more like if you ate a piece of cake and you felt extremely satisfied from this piece of cake, the nucleus accumbens will be responsible for your hand going for another piece of cake and constantly eating it until the cake is done. So this driving of the motor function, like the cycling of the motor functions, this is what's causing us to be attracted back to the same reward and the source of this reward. Next, I'd like to talk about intertemporal choices. And an intertemporal choice is when a decision maker is making a decision based on the costs and benefits that are distributed over a period of time. So, for example, someone might assign more utility to an outcome that is more immediate than something that is more far away. So, for example, if you wanted a chocolate bar, you might consider one chocolate bar having more utility or providing more utility to you than if you got 10 chocolate bars in 2 days. This intertemporal choice and future discounting, these are these have been studied, and studies have shown that the limbic system of the brain, which forms part of the rewards pathway responding to dopamine as previously discussed. This limbic system has been shown to be highly active when decision makers make decisions that provide immediate gratification, whereas the activities of the prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex remain relatively constant, independent of the waiting time until the point of reward. However, the ratio of the activity level of the limbic system to that of the prefrontal cortex has been shown to decrease as the waiting time for the reward was increasing. Another aspect that I like to talk about in this project is about loss aversion. As humans, we tend to value the losses of a situation more than the gains. Even though the losses and gains could be equal in magnitude, we place different values on how much they mean to us. We tend to be affected more negatively by our losses than positively by the gains. So a study that was done to figure out to establish the source of loss aversion. The study participants had damaged amygdala, and they took part in monetary gambles to assess the response. And the study participants, although they showed no change in the response to changes in the risk and expected value, they did show a significant reduction in loss aversion when their brain activity was measured. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is oxytocin. And even though there's a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty that comes along with decisions that are made financially and in the business world, oxytocin is a biochemical molecule that produces the feeling of trust. So oxytocin is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary gland is responsible for secreting this hormone into the bloodstream. Oxytocin has been shown to be responsible for many functions like maternal bonding, uterine contraction during labor, stimulating women's breast for breastfeeding, and mediating inflammation of a wound. Oxytocin has been called the trust hormone. It promotes trust between businessmen who make financial transactions and investment deals every day. In a study, participants that were given nasal oxytocin spray actually invested 17% more in their partners than those who were given the placebo spray. So this concludes my video and my project on the biology behind behavioral economics. It was great to see. It was great to see all the biological phenomena that were being explained in order to explain the behavior that we see every day. So thank you for watching this video.